Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. This is Mr. Shakespeare going with you on the 1st of January 2025, New Year and all that jazz. I'm joined as usual by psychic medium and remote viewer Liz Cross. How are we doing today, Liz?
Still recovering from the flu, but better than what I was doing. Thank you.
Awesome.
Happy New Year, Mr. Shakespeare.
You, yes. Thank you all our wonderful viewers and listeners. So this is something that you were asked to do a while back. I think you solicited some questions, um, which you sent me, and so we've edited those and we've gone through them, and we're looking at what is the future for the middle class.
Mm,
Um, we're not going to try and do the whole world today. We're only going to pick on four regions: the US, UK, Canada, and Australia, uh, in that order, actually. Um, Obviously, a lot depends on the politics, on who's running what. So I don't know how far out you want to go, Liz. I've set up a bunch of things that we can probe, but how far
okay.
do we want to go out, or where do we want to start?
We can start from now and let's go to the end of this century. So for the next 75 years. I think that's important. I think this is probably a very important probe for most of us, especially those of us with children or grandchildren. What is their future going to be like? It's no longer about all you have to do is work hard, okay, in the US or in a lot of these countries. It is a lot more than that. And I hope this video will help us be prepared for the future for our children's sake. It's not you graduate high school and you go work hard and you buy a house and everything's rosy and you have money in the bank and you travel when you retire. I don't think it's like that anymore. And so I want to see where this is headed.
Okay, so we're going to start with the United States, US.
Hmm.
Um, we're going to use the founding fathers, so Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, Hamilton, et al. Madison and John Jay. So if you can group them together, please.
Yep, I have them here.
Right. So let's ask, what is the future for the middle class in the United States? What's an
So
overall?
sorry, I jumped in there. I asked them actually when they were around, was there a middle class? And they're telling me no. There really wasn't a middle class. There was an upper class and there was a lower class. The
Yeah.
middle class only came, what they're saying to me, with industrialization,
Yeah.
right? So the ability to start mass producing things, the ability to ship and receive things, to do more world trading, that's when we started to see the rise of the middle class. Other than that, you have the elite class, which is obviously where they are, and you have the poor class. So, what is the future of the middle class? Are we going back to how it was when you were here? Absolutely. So they've just confirmed that. So are you saying that we're not going to have a middle class in the future? That's correct. So are we only going to have a upper class and a lower class, the division? Yes, mostly that will be it. You're either going to have the elite or the wealthy class, or you're going to have the poverty class. What happens in the future with regards to people being able to own their own home? Because obviously that is something that the middle class here in the States, we're talking about the middle class here. I know there's different definitions of middle class throughout the world, but here, what will happen with home ownership in the future? It will be non-existent. Home ownership will be reserved for those that are the elite class.
Okay, but over what kind of, we're in 2020, 2025 now, and you wanted to probe out till the end of the century, which is 75 years. Over what timeline? do they envisage this happening?
Over what timeline do you see that a majority of Americans will not be able to buy a home? They're saying within 30 years. So within 30 years, a majority of Americans will not be able to buy a home. They will have to lease or rent.
Okay, but I mean, if you own a home now in the United States, which is free of debt, which is something that everybody should try and become free of debt, um, surely you can just pass that down from family to generations to generations.
Well, what about passing the home ownership down through the generations? Yeah, but eventually you run out of home to pass down, right? If you have 3 or 4 children,
Yeah,
now you're passing one home down to 3 or 4 children,
right.
and they have their own children. You're out of home. Not everybody can live in
No.
that home. So then it gets chopped up. It gets bought up by what they're telling me by a developer, and then it becomes a rental property.
Okay, so history is replete with many examples. I mean, yeah, I mean, so I hate using the word elite because they're not elite. They're just, they're the original money grabbers, if you like, usurpers or
Yeah.
whatever. But these people, all right, so to expand the economy, there were, okay, let me just talk about England because I know more about England than most other countries. But to expand the English economy, the rich, there was always the rich and there was always the poor. So the rich owned all the land in England, and they defended it with castles and all sorts of things. The poor worked on the land because we were an agrarian economy. And it's true what the founding fathers said. Everything changed when we became, when the Industrial Revolution happened. Okay. But then when the factories started, they needed people to work in these factories. So a lot of people had to come off the land and work in these factories. And these factories ended up producing things, whether they were items of clothing or a new belt or a pair of shoes or whatever. But the problem is that they needed the factory owners, they needed the people to be able, they needed people to be able to buy these goods and services, and hence the starting of the middle class. It was one of the reasons, by the way, in England why they started the leasehold program. All property was owned free, free and clear, freehold. And then they started a brilliant scam scheme called leasehold, where they retain ownership of it and they sell you periodic ownership of it for a period of time, you know, in which case you have to pay a rent to them. I mean, it's like you own it. The leases were very long, but it never actually left, there's a lot that never left the establishment control. Central London is a brilliant example. The Duke of
Mm.
Westminster owns so much property in there, most of which he just rents out, leases out. He owns it all, but I mean, he rents it out. You can get mortgages on it because some of it's on, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 year leases. But they've never relinquished control of property. And now what it seems like is they're trying to go back to two class again. I know that the upper class, the so-called elites, these people hate the aspirational middle class, and yet they needed the middle class where would Amazon, where would all these big companies be without people to sell their products to?
Mm. Or to package them,
Yeah, or do anything with
or
them.
to deliver them, or
Right.
yes, or to make them, or
Right.
I
Because they
totally
need buyers.
understand.
They need, and if it's not buyers in this country, then it's buyers in another country, but they've still got to have the money to buy that new pair of shoes, that pair of trousers, whatever, that radio set. So they're trying to go back. I mean, I don't know if this is part of a general thing because we're now coming out of the industrial age. We're now going into the information age. Okay, we don't need as much factory workers. Most of factory production will be taken over by robotics controlled by computers. You know, I mean, labor is one of the most expensive things that any business owner has to deal with. And also, most of the HR departments have to deal with things like, and it's just, they would rather get rid of labor. In the beginning, they couldn't. Now, with AI, and things like that, as AI gets developed over the next few years, a lot of the stalwart management class job, accountancy, lawyer, all of those positions will go because AI will be able to do all of it. So they'll be getting rid of the middle class that way, you know. Obviously,
Yeah.
if they make housing very expensive and all that lot, I mean, they keep putting the price of houses up, yeah, then fewer and fewer people will be able to buy it, and then we'll be back into a rental existence, which is where we started. A lot of people most people in England didn't own their houses. Houses were pretty much unaffordable for most people until about the 1950s, 60s, where they actually changed the rules so people could actually borrow money. It was very difficult to borrow money prior to that to buy a house, you
And
know?
so that's a good point. Is it going to be very difficult to borrow money in the future? Exceptionally difficult, right? So the pendulum, you're right, Mr. Shakespeare, is swinging the other way. We're
Yeah.
now coming out of, let's ask, are we now coming out of the industrial? They're of the mindset that we're already out of it.
Yeah, well, I am
Uh,
as well. Yeah, but it takes quite, yes, I think they're correct, but it takes, it doesn't just happen on one Thursday. It takes a little while, you know. But I think we are out of it. I think we are moving towards the information age. So, yes.
so so going forward, when they said the 30 years, they meant 30 years at that point of new home ownerships, right?
Right.
So not people that already have their homes, not people that have already paid off their homes, or maybe they've inherited homes. But going forward, what percentage of the new home buyers or that generation will be able to actually buy their home? 15%. So we're going to see a massive pullback. And of those 15%, will they be able to get mortgages? I mean, they will, but they're going to have these very, very large down payments. Now, this brings me to the point of where what I thought was I could see happening because I lived in the UK for many years and excuse me, I lived in London and you're not getting a down payment in London, right? It's very, very difficult to save for a down payment because the even though you're saving, usually the inflation and house prices can actually outpace your savings. So going forward, it's no longer going to be sufficient for parents to just say, well, I've raised you, I fed you, I clothed you, you've graduated high school, you're on your own. Now, if you want your children or possibly grandchildren to get on the housing ladder, you've got to give them that deposit. So let's ask this question. Is that where we're headed? That's absolutely where we're headed. Let me ask them this. When you were, excuse me, sorry about the coughing. When you were around um, as the founding fathers, how did you buy homes? They paid cash for them. And how were you able to pay cash for them? Was it already family money in play? Yes, it was. So they already had a trust fund, if you want to call it that. I don't know if the trust were, they're telling me no, it wasn't like a trust fund, but it was family money. And they already had a lot of that backing them in order so that they could buy property. And what happened when people didn't have that kind of money to buy property? Where a lot of them, they're telling me they would go out into areas that were not populated and they would just lay claim to a piece of land and but we can't do that now, right? I mean, that's not something that's open to us now. So going forward, what is going to be more valuable? Is it going to be the land or is it going to be actual home ownership? Well, going forward, if you want to make sure that your family has like a homestead, and that's back in the day. You see that a lot here out where I am in farming towns and farming communities where the families own hundreds of acres of land and the families live on the land. You know, they put their own little houses or whatever on the land. So is that how we're going to go in the future? Yes, it is. So if you want to ensure that all of your family has somewhere to live and they have land to live on that they can own free and clear going in the future, land is more valuable than the actual house itself.
Right. Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, make no mistake, the founding fathers that came over there were not a bunch of poor people. They were very wealthy. And
Mm,
everything in those days was done, there was no credit. I mean, credit was issued by credit was issued to people who didn't need the money by banks, and things. I mean, it wasn't issued to the guy in the street. All of these things that have happened to create the middle class to be able to make the
mm,
economy bigger. Because if there were
right.
only the seriously rich and the poor, and we still lived, tolling on the farms and everything, we wouldn't be anywhere near as advanced as we are now.
No, no, you're right. So let's ask this question. Going forward, why won't people be able to get mortgages and loans from the banks? Because job certainty will not be there, right? That's what they've just said to me. Jobs will be here today, gone tomorrow. They're not about to give you a 30-year loan, a 30-year, 25-year mortgage loan on a property for a job that you have at that moment. 5 years from now, that job may be non existent. That's how rapid things are going to change. You're going to see mass jobs, springing up, closing down, something bigger and better coming along. So, what about like the people that are nurses, doctors, um, police officers, emergency services? Will they be able to have mortgages? Yes, they will. And what about people like teachers? Teachers, I'm getting a no on the teachers. Teachers will be replaced with online learning, is what they're telling me now.
Oh yeah,
How far?
university. Yeah, there'll be no point in getting into debt going into universities because the online learning will be a lot better and a lot cheaper. Yeah, I mean that's the thing of AI. As AI expands itself out, it will take out a lot of these positions. There will be no need for them. There will be no need for big, Yale and Harvard and all that. Those things are dated. They are not going to be required in the future. One
You
thing that
know,
people
you
should
know
be
what's
thinking about is being analog in a digital world. So if you're looking at, trades, electricians, plumbers, people who have to work with their hand, those things are going to be they're going to be of use for quite a few years yet, I can tell you. Those will be the last things that ever get changed, if at all.
what's that?
Well, being an electrician, being a plumber, being you know,
Oh,
being a
yeah.
construction worker. I mean, AI is not going to fix your plumbing leak. AI is not going to rewire your house. AI is not going to build your building. They're still going to need the trades and all of that. So they're what I call analog trades. So you want to be in analog trades in the digital world. If their whole point is to get rid of the middle class, but by essentially owning everything, and the guys everybody has to rent from them, which is exactly how it used to be. I mean, everything was rented from the elite. I mean, they're going back, and the reason they're doing it is because they don't need the population, you know. Come to the questions. Will Social Security still be around? We'll go 10 years and then 30 years.
Okay. Will Social Security still be around in 10 years? Yes, in 10 years. In 30 years, Social Security will eventually be replaced with a universal basic income.
Okay. Um,
That's what they just said.
I mean, if you have the money now, you would buy land and property, well, and then if you have three children, you put it, you could put one in each of their names, and that's as far as you can go. You can't, unless you're uber rich, you can't really say, well, my children are going to have children, so we'll have to buy some extra property. Most people can't do that. And when I mean buy property, I mean debt free, not with any kind of debt. If you have any kind of debt on it, a bank can pull your train at any time. So you don't want that. So one of the questions has come up, and I'll expand on it big time. So what can people do to protect themselves against this? What hedges can people use? You know, is a cryptocurrency a hedge? Is it gold? Is it, what can people do to try and protect themselves against this in the long term? And we'll
What can
go out,
people
10, 20, 30 years for now for starters.
can do to hedge against this in the long term? It's to build and save as much money as possible, is what
Right.
I'm getting. So what about gold? I mean, gold, yes. What about silver? Yes. But it's about accumulation of wealth. The
Well, I
only
know, but
way you're going
where
to,
do you hold your wealth? Because you might hold it in US dollars. US dollar might still be around, but it might be worth fractions of what it's worth now in buying power. On the other hand, it might not be. I don't know. That's be part. Could be. We could ask that question.
okay, will the US dollar retain its value? No, it won't. Going forward 50 years, 30 to 50 years, it's not going to retain its value. It's going to have almost no value. So going forward, would you say Bitcoin is going to retain its value? Yes. Yes, it will. But you have got to beat two things here. You've got to beat inflation and you've got to beat devaluation of the dollar.
Well, Bitcoin is a deflationary currency, so it should beat inflation and it will beat the deflation of the dollar because it will take so many more dollars to keep buying a Bitcoin or fractions thereof, because Bitcoin is a finite amount.
Okay.
So
Okay.
anything that's a finite amount, has built-in scarcity value built, already. Gold, well, I mean, yes, it has a sort of finite amount. There are many, many, many different versions of what finite amounts are. There are all sorts of rumors and conspiracies about how much gold is actually on the planet and, tucked away. Um, so I don't know. People have to find out. Paid off real estate, paid off land is always a is always a good thing. It's what the rich have been investing in, since day one. They've always, wanted to have land and control of properties and things like that. But for the rest of it, it's how do you protect yourself? Well, you become debt free. The quickest way to protecting yourself is to get debt free. Do
Well,
not
they're
have it.
saying yes, and the accumulation of wealth. You have
Yeah, but
to
you've got to hold it
accumulate.
somewhere. So the question was, I mean, there's been a couple of questions in that you sent me about, and I'm just sort of expanding them out. Some people are saying, are there any stocks or ETFs that can hold, that can do this? It's not about, it's about preserving that wealth over a very long term,
Mhm.
you know?
So
So
what about,
I'll give you an example. The Duke of Westminster, he owns most of the properties in central London. His family, the Grosvenor family, they bought them and got them gifted or whatever many, many, many hundreds of years ago in prime London real estate, right slap bang in the most expensive part of London. But it became the most expensive part of London because London became the most important part of the UK. It's the capital, it's on the river and everything. Now just imagine that, Boise, Idaho or something became the most important place in the US. If you were to buy real estate in Boise, Idaho, in the center of downtown or something and that became the most important point, real estate there would go through the roof. It's all about the location of where the property that you buy, and the land that you buy. If you want it to hold immense value over time, you've got to get it in the. If you just want it to hold value, and maybe to be able to be gifted, inherited to your children, then I suppose it doesn't matter as much. But there's real estate and there's real estate, isn't there? Free.
there is, but I think going forward, it's not just about saving money for yourself and your well-being. It goes beyond that. What I'm getting is it's accumulating for the entire family for generations to come. That is the only way you are going to beat the universal basic income system, the fact that the middle class is diminishing, the fact that you will not be able to get loans or mortgages, and your job certainty, unless you are, like you said, in the trades or you are an essential worker, it's not going to be there. But the question I had was, okay, so if the trades jobs are still in flow, will we see more people flowing into the trades? Yeah. So electricians is what they're telling me, and plumbers and all those carpenters, they're going to be a dime a dozen. So their overall wages, where we pay them a lot of money now, those wages are going to go down because there's going to be mass, tradesmen out there, or women. There's going to be mass amounts of them. So it's going to be extremely competitive. So
Okay,
if
but
you think,
this will happen over time. There is still, unfortunately, the mindset of people who think it's a good idea, to go to college or university and get a degree, in something, and it doesn't matter what, because degrees have virtually no value, and then walk out with $100,000, $200,000 in debt. That is not a smart. That's not something that's sustainable. The only
no.
people who make money out of that are the universities. There is no point in doing that anymore. No child now should be thinking of going anywhere near one of these places. You
And
know?
you know what? You know what, Mr. Shakespeare? My oldest son just recently graduated.
Uh-huh.
He graduated early. His friends, we met up recently with them, and we were like, where are you going to go to school? They're still trying to get into Princeton,
Right.
Harvard. I'm not joking. Um, Tulane or Oxbridge or all of these places. And I'm like, well, what's your degree going to be in? Oh, it's going to be in, languages or art or Latin or, whatever. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do with that degree? I was being very positive, obviously, but I'm working out the calculations in my brain. What are you going to do with that degree when you're finished? Oh, well, I want to be a college professor. And I'm thinking to myself, and their parents are quite happy to let them go into these private universities, go into three, four, $500,000 worth of debt. Yes, they're going to give them some money towards it, but they're still of this mindset. So let's ask this question: when will the American population actually get it? When will they get it? No, they're not going to get it until 20 to 30 years from now. That's when we're going to see a big shift with a lot of these college graduates coming out in debt. There's no jobs available. Even if they're going in, let's ask this question, even if they're going in to do IT, computer engineering, things like that, are those jobs going to be there? No, not necessarily. So you could be going into university to take on a job, excuse me, or take on a learning or a course in order to come out and be some sort of IT networker or whatever. And that job can be gone by the time you get out and you're in the hole for all that money. Will they offer a student loan forgiveness program? I'm getting a no on that. I'm getting a firm no. And that
Well,
keeps
no, there's
getting,
no need for them to do it. You got yourself in debt, and that's another way of controlling you. If
well,
you, I mean, they're not going to do that. No.
Well, what I'm getting is that issue will be bounced over to the Supreme Court many times, but the Supreme Court will knock it down and make the debt payable. So a lot of people do go into university thinking that, oh, it doesn't matter, they'll forgive the student loan debt anyway, and the founding fathers are telling me no on that. So
Well, they're
this is
fine, but
where
it's
we're headed.
un-American. You got yourself into debt. You've got to pay it back. I mean, you shouldn't have got into it in the first place. You should listen to Liz and Mr. Shakespeare. Don't do it. Don't go to
If
Princeton.
only.
Don't go to Harvard. Leave those places. Those could be turned into more useful buildings.
Now, one thing I did get on another reading, and I want to ask the founding fathers this question, is going forward, a lot of people, are they going to make money by being traders in the stock market? Yes, that's going to be their only option. Now, I know that a lot of you are on the Patreon and we appreciate that. And we've actually found some income-based funds that if you invest in over time, you build it up and you're creating a passive income on the side. Let's ask the founding fathers this question. Are those funds going to be able to, is that going to pave the way for these generational trusts in the future? And I got a yes on that. So it's about creating generational trust. When we get to the turn of the century, what percentage of new generations will be able to buy the home? Less than 1%. That's how quickly things are going to change. Now, excuse me, you may not think that that's very quickly, but in the grand scheme of things, that's quite quick. Don't you think, Mr. Shakespeare?
Um, well, yeah, I suppose. I mean, I won't be around in 75 years, nor will you.
Well,
But
you don't know.
I don't think so. No. But the point is that they're just going back. You know, you've got to look at the fourth turning. We're in the fourth turning. Read Strauss and Howe's book. I mean, we're in this other turning now, so we're starting again. You know, and they want to go back to, you know, they don't need the people, so they certainly don't want, you know, they have a horrible disdain of the middle class. The poor, the poor are the poor. Okay. But the upper class, the so-called elites, the people with all the money, the people that really run everything, that control absolutely everything, they have a hump. They do not like the middle class because they're aspirational and they don't like any of that. You know, it's
Well, they don't like competition. They
yeah, but
because
we're
they
not
live in the
competition.
aspiration.
We can never take on, you know, I mean, okay, all right. There are people that are quite wealthy, you know, in a way. I mean, Elon Musk is middle class, but he's seriously rich. Jeff Bezos is middle class and they're seriously rich, but they can't take on the establishment, you know, the whole, I mean, they don't have the bloodlines, they don't have the family connections. So, you know, we're all middle class. Somebody explained it to me once. It runs from about one version is 10 to 9 is 10%, the bottom 10% to the upper 90%, and somebody said it's the bottom 10% to the upper 95% of the whole population. You know, those are the middle class. You know, the seriously rich and these so-called elites and all that lot, they only represent a very small percent in numbers of people. Okay. But these are, you know, the ancient banking families. These are the families that, you know, they made their money hundreds of years ago and they pretty much control everything and they still do to this day, you know. And they're the ones that give the orders that the politicians follow.
Yes. So let's ask this question. What about Canada? Is Canada virtually, is it really going a similar? No, Canada, what they're telling me is going to go on like a single system. So it's going to basically end up in a communist system where everybody receives an income. If you have a job, that's great. If you don't, you're going to be paid out. Will they be able to have home ownership? No, they're not. What about the UK? Excuse me, the UK, is it going to follow suit? Pretty much. Pretty much. It's going to be the government and the elite foreign investors, foreign elite investors will own most of the property and the land in the UK. And it's going to go back into a 90%, even more, rental system. Again, diminishing the middle class.
Hmm. Yep.
What about Australia? Is that the similar thing that I feel Australia is already well ahead of the game?
Yeah.
I feel Australia, what they're telling me is a lot faster than it is for the US and the UK. In Canada, it's a lot faster. They're already at a point where people can barely afford to buy property. So now they're already starting to diminish that middle class. Will they end up on a single payer or a single income? Yes, they will. They will end up on a universal basic income. And let's just double check it. So going forward, when do we end up on a universal basic income here in the States? Are we looking at like 2040? No, 2050, 2060. But so around 2050, 2060, we're going to swap over because people, what about the rate of homelessness here in the States? Is that going to increase with all this massive wipeout of jobs? Yes, it is. We're going to see a massive homeless population, maybe even up to 15 to 20% homelessness. And this is when they decide to change things and turn things around. So, I mean, you have to be prepared. You may not like this information, but it's very, very important knowing that that's where we're headed, what you can do to prepare yourself and your future generations. Now, maybe you don't care. Maybe you don't care about your future generations. Me personally, I really care. I don't want them to live in a government housing on a government income, which will be hardly anything. And let's ask this question. Will there be in the USA a national health system to support all these people on universal basic income? Yes, but it's going to be the bare minimum. It's not going to be the system that we have now. It is going to be the absolute bare minimum. So if people don't understand what that means, I think without getting into the whole healthcare argument, because a lot of people got their feathers ruffled over that Luigi thing. And I could see spirit telling me nothing's going to change, nothing's going to change. But going forward, what the founding fathers are saying that it will be basic healthcare, emphasis on the word basic. So what about the elite? Will they still have healthcare? Yes. So there's going to be a big divide between private healthcare and this government basic healthcare, which you still will have to contribute a large portion of your basic income to just to receive the bare minimum of care.
Yeah.
There are ways and means around this. You just have to be smart and you just have to know how to accumulate. You have to know how to invest. So let's ask this question. What about going forward, investing in robotics ETFs? Is that a good investment? They said yes. And what about going forward, investing in AI ETFs? Is that a good maneuver as well? Yes, it is. But they're also saying you want to have tangible objects like land, gold, silver, things that you can hold in your hand.
Mhm. So exactly
So,
the same as it always was.
so it's going back. Let's ask one final question. Are we going back to similar scenarios of when you guys were on the earth plane? Exact same thing, right? So you're gonna have the poor and the sick. They're not really going to be treated. They're going to have to work very hard to find food. They'll have to do jobs like where they're servants and cleaners and cooks and farmers and things like that. For the elite, that's how they will survive. Even if you're a plumber or electrician, or if you're a mechanic, things like that, you're still serving those that have possibly, most likely, more money than you could ever hope to accumulate. So that's where we're headed, and we've got to be prepared. Anything more from you, Mr. Shakespeare?
No, I think we've covered it. We have actually done this before. I remember and it's the same. It hasn't changed really. This hasn't changed. Um, history often repeats itself. So you know, we're just going back now. We're restarting in the new way that they want us all to be, you know, and they've got to come up with
Right.
very clever ways of um, how can I put this? Uh, Making sure some of us are not around to worry them.
Right. Right. I mean, yeah. And you know, I mean, I know the wealthy pay taxes, but they also pay a lot of tax attorneys, so they don't have to pay as much taxes. So let's ask this question going forward. Who will end up paying more taxes, the poor or the elite by percentage? The poor. The poor will end up paying 50 to 60% tax by percentage, whereas the elite will only pay 10% or less by percentage.
Mm.
You've got to pay. People think that free means free, right? It doesn't. The money has to come from somewhere. So if you're having a universal basic income, if you're having like a very basic healthcare provisions or even food provisions or whatever it is, somebody has to pay for that. And they find ways to pay for it, and it's much easier to pillage the lower classes, the middle and the lower classes in taxes than it is the elite. The elite, they know how to hide their money. They know how to escape those high taxes. They know how to invest in property, and all their money is tied up on paper. They know how to do all this, whereas those opportunities are not available for middle and lower classes. Are we going to see this shift mainly throughout the world? Yes, it is. So this isn't just a Western world shift. As we're no longer producing things and needing humans, like you said, Mr. Shakespeare, to produce those things, we're going to see that whole workforce of people that otherwise would earn wages completely be cut out from earning money. All right. Well, anything more from you, Mr. Shakespeare? I think we'll stop this one here.
No, I think we've covered it.
Yeah. I know we've eked this out a few different ways in different probes, but I find this fascinating, and we have to be prepared. All right, I'll stop this one here. Thank you.